Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in today. I'm James Peppe, and this is PepTalks. So today we're going to dive headfirst into the latest controversy that everybody's talking about, the latest conspiracy theory. I'm not usually one who's big on conspiracy theories. In fact, I'm sort of a conspiracy skeptic. And what I mean by that is not that I don't believe they're possible. I just have a hard time believing that two people, much less hundreds or thousands, can keep a juicy secret, especially people in the American government. That's why I tend to be a little bit skeptical. But the one that people are talking about today does interest me because it's weird and there's a lot of question marks about it. Now, talking about the Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy, and if you've been living under a rock and you don't know what I'm talking about, a quick recap. Epstein, now dead, was the billionaire who was accused of running a sex trafficking ring involving minor girls. And he owned a private island down in the Caribbean. And he was famously well known for his network of friendships and relationships that included no less than Donald Trump and Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, Bill Gates, and a bunch of others, right? When he was finally arrested after decades, I don't know what decades, but years and years of being chased by the authorities, arrested back in 2019, a short while after his arrest while he was in jail, he was found dead in his cell from an apparent suicide. That's one of the controversies, one of the conspiracy parts of the conspiracy, right? Did he commit suicide, or was he murdered to be kept quiet because maybe there have been powerful people connected to him or involved in his pedophile ring? Now, that is the controversy. That is the conspiracy that everybody's talking about. And in particular, what people want to know, what the conspiracy theorists want to know is, did he keep a master client list that might incriminate some of these rich and powerful people that were his friends in the day? In the last week, after years of promising to release information like a client list, like some hard evidence about whether he actually committed suicide or perhaps was murdered in jail. After years of that, the Trump Justice Department under Attorney General Pam Bondi just came out and released what I think they're saying is their final report, which says that there was no client list and he did in fact commit suicide. No evidence to the contrary. Now, as you can imagine, a lot of folks who have been really wrapped up in this whole conspiracy and really intently so, and understandably, by the way, if such a thing were true and rich and powerful people in our country were engaged in a pedophile sex trafficking ring, that would be beyond disgusting and outrageous. So it's understandable that a lot of people take interest in that. But anyways, the administration is saying that that didn't happen. None of that happened. Or at least powerful people weren't, to their knowledge, implicated in that, and that they're trying to move on. Now, in the case of President Trump and his supporters, they're kind of split down the middle on this. Half of them kind of go along with the president and the attorney general and say, okay, we're done here. And the other half are saying, whoa, we're not done at all. You promised us the goods, and now we're getting a nothing burger. It's really interesting in so many different ways. I'm going to talk about it here for a little bit in a way that I think is different than most other people, because I don't know the answer, right? I have my own opinions, as do you, and I'll be anxious, after the show for you to leave your comments. Let me know what you think. By the way, if you haven't yet, subscribe to Pep Talks, like, follow, share, all that stuff. Please do that. Anyways, I'm going to talk about it a little bit differently, because I'm going to show you that as of today, there are two possibilities. Either there is and has been a conspiracy to hide really important facts about this case, like a client list, like whether he was actually murdered and didn't take his own life. That's one possibility. Or if that's not true, right? If that was never the case, if there was no list, if there is no evidence suggesting anything other than suicide, it's one or the other, right? And so you have to start kind of seeing where you come down on this. underneath those two possibilities, because I'm going to go through this kind of methodically. This episode's about sort of common sense logic, because I don't claim to know. I know what I've read. I know what I've heard. I know kind of where the sides line up, but I am going to reach a conclusion that in any of the possibilities down this sort of ladder, there is a common denominator that is relevant to Pep Talks and is relevant to you and what you should be thinking about beyond the surface level. Is it or isn't it, right? So there are two possibilities. Like I said, maybe there was never a conspiracy. Maybe there was never a list of high profile, rich and famous people who were his clients and who engaged in his illicit activities down on his island, Little St. James. Maybe that was never true. Maybe he did just commit suicide. Maybe it's as simple as that. Or the second option, the second possibility is that there is an ongoing conspiracy, that there is a list of names of people who were involved, who could be pursued as being complicit in his criminal activities. Maybe there is plenty of evidence that he did not commit suicide. There's certainly circumstantial evidence about that, right? There's a lot of suspicion about that. So those are the two options. And by the way, let me make one side note that I think is interesting, because people keep talking about this client list, and the administration said there is no client list. And I can't help but wonder if that's a word game on their part, right? If Jeffrey Epstein didn't keep like a grocery list of bullet points of all the people that were on his island and took advantage of minor girls and all that sort of thing. But certainly through flight logs and other records, other information, not to mention eyewitness accounts from a lot of the girls who have been looking for justice for years on this. Certainly the FBI, the authorities have compiled a list of people who were associates of Epstein and who maybe were around on his island or in his orbit when these things were taking place. So whether it was Epstein's list or just a list compiled by authorities, certainly there is a list of names. But I get this feeling that the Justice Department, Attorney General Bondi, and the president and the others are maybe playing a little bit of games with this literal term, client list. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. It's also important to keep in mind that along the way, there have been some really interesting developments in the way that the authorities did or didn't pursue these allegations for a decade. And I'll try to get to it later, but there's one especially interesting part where the U.S. attorney, a guy by the name of Alex Acosta in Miami, where the feds had the goods on Epstein back in 2007, 8, 9, somewhere in there, had him ready to file like 60 charges against him. Acosta gave him this, by all accounts, this sweetheart plea bargain deal. And I'll try to get into that later if I can. But the really interesting part for this discussion is that in 2017, when Trump became president the first time, he made Acosta a cabinet member. He appointed him as Secretary of Labor. And by then there was plenty of controversy about the way he had handled the Epstein case. And yet Trump still made him his labor secretary. So that's kind of interesting. So there's a bunch of stuff like that floating around here, but let's get back to the two possibilities and the sort of the logic that I want to draw about this thing that leads to a conclusion that whatever way it played out, there's something you should keep in mind. So again, the two possibilities: there hasn't been a conspiracy, or there is an ongoing conspiracy. If you are of the mind, if you're prepared to believe the Trump administration that there's never been a conspiracy, there's no client list, and there's no evidence that he committed suicide, right? If you're inclined to believe that, then you have to go to the next step, which is two more possibilities. Now, again, let me interject this. A lot of these people on Team Trump and supporters in his bigger network have really been the proponents of this conspiracy theory. And a bunch of them have made fortunes off of it. In some cases, literal financial fortunes. In other cases, they've reaped huge political benefits of one kind or another. Trump's campaign for re-election, in many respects, was run on releasing all the information, this hidden information about Epstein, the client list and the evidence and all this stuff. They pushed the conspiracy theory too. And in the administration, a couple other names to keep in mind. Bondi's the Attorney General. The FBI director is a guy by the name of Kash Patel, and his deputy is a guy by the name of Dan Bongino, right? And Patel and Bongino especially had podcasts and whipped up this conspiracy theory. And let me be clear about something. These guys, oh, by the way, other guys too, Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, General Flynn, all these guys, they didn't just put this idea out there, this conspiracy, as in, this might have happened. It's my opinion. I think possibly we need to get to the bottom of it. They asserted very certainly that it was true, that they knew something that we didn't know. And they were adamant and insistent that Trump be elected president so he could get all this information into the light of day. And so that's, again, an important part of the background. But let's go back to the point. There was never a conspiracy. That's just one of the possibilities, right? So from there, two other possibilities. Either guys like Bondi and Patel and Bongino and all these guys, either they were just wrong, made an innocent mistake. And I haven't heard any of them say that. I haven't heard any of them say that. They've said a lot of things that contradicted what they said before, but I haven't heard anyone say, well, we were just mistaken. We were just wrong. Which, by the way, would be a refreshing amount of kind of candor from these guys to say, we really talked it up before, but now we're here and we see that there was nothing there. We were just wrong. That's one possibility. But the second possibility is that they weren't just wrong. They knew the truth. They knew that that wasn't right. And they told you that loudly over and over again for years in a way to manipulate you, to get you to give them money, watch their shows, help them accumulate political power, help Donald Trump get reelected. If it was a lie, right, that was intentionally pushed on you for their benefit, that's the second possibility, right? Either they were just innocently wrong or it was a lie all along. Okay. So innocent mistake. Let's talk about that for a second. Well, okay. Depending on your level of grace, you might forgive them, right? You might say, well, we all make mistakes and at least they've admitted it and owned up to it. Okay. You can do that. But in politics, certainly at the highest level of our country, there has to be a trust factor. And you have to start asking yourself, boy, even if it's true that that was an innocent mistake, that's sure bad judgment to go around talking the way they did, and asserting what they did, and insisting that the other side apparently was covering this whole thing up, and that we need to get to the bottom of it by electing a different guy and all this stuff. And by the way, I'm making millions off it in the meantime. That's bad judgment. It brings into question their competency, their credibility going forward, their trustworthiness. And so you have to ask yourself, if you're kind of in that space, am I going to trust them anymore? Am I going to really believe them? What else may they have been wrong about besides this really big thing? So there's that. And these are the people running our government today at the highest levels. Again, Trump, the Attorney General, the FBI Director, and the number 2 is the FBI. Let's go to the second option, right? Under never a conspiracy. Second option is that they intentionally manipulated you. They lied all along so that they could make money and accumulate political power. Well, what do I have to say about that? If they were doing that to you, if they were lying all along, they knew it was wrong. Let me make an analogy. You may or may not have caught this story. It came and went, but it was pretty big for a minute. Tucker Carlson got fired from Fox News because Fox News had to settle a lawsuit for almost $1 billion because he was caught lying on the air about 2020 election fraud. He was caught red-handed where he had written texts and emails and told people around him that all of that stuff about the stolen election was bullshit, that none of it was true. And then he would go on the air and tell everybody that it was true. And so this is kind of what happens, right? Some of these people will use their position, their platforms, their microphones in the media to manipulate you with lies and, go back to the water cooler and laugh about it. So I would think that if you came to that conclusion, okay, I believe these guys that maybe there's not a list and maybe he did commit suicide, but I don't believe them when they say it was just an innocent mistake. They were just wrong. they knew and they did it on purpose. If you're in that camp, what do you do with that? I mean, how can you ever trust or believe these guys again? And remember, people at the top of our government today, including the president of the United States. Okay, so that's one side of the big picture. Two possibilities. Never a conspiracy. We just went through that. Or there is a conspiracy. Let's talk about that for a minute. There is a conspiracy. There are people today, Trump, again, remember I said Team Trump is kind of split in half on this. Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, General Mike Flynn, a bunch of others are insisting that this isn't the last word. And they're for the first time I've ever heard them, they're complaining about their side, Team Trump in the White House and then the Justice Department, for some reason, continuing this cover up, right? This alleged cover up. Interesting side note, again, these guys seem to be aiming their fire more at Pam Bondi and not at President Trump, who has been very, very loud and vocal and outspoken in defense of Bondi on this and wants to move on, has told all of his followers, what are you doing? Why are you fighting? Oh, this is a stupid, nobody cares about this. Let it go. Let's move on. Well, they all cared about it over the last 4 or 5 years. And now all of a sudden, Trump and Bondi and all those guys want to just forget about it. So Bannon, Carlson, Kelly, Flynn, all those guys, they don't want to just forget about it. They're mad, but they're aiming their fire at Bondi because they're afraid to point at Trump. Simple as that. But anyway, that's a side note. So the possibility that we're working on here, we've already talked about it was never a conspiracy. Now we're going to talk about it isn't a conspiracy. It's ongoing. Bannon, Carlson, Kelly, Flynn, all those guys are right. And something's going on in the White House and in the administration that they've decided to go down the other track. So under that category, it's an ongoing conspiracy. Jeffrey Epstein, a bunch of people were involved. There's a client list of one kind or another someplace, and there's evidence of him not having committed suicide. By the way, the administration let out a video, the only video available apparently of the doorway to Epstein's jail cell, and the only one that was working that night, just coincidentally. And it shows nobody coming or going out of the cell, but it conveniently has a missing minute of footage. And there are reports everywhere that the footage that is there, over how many hours of it, I don't know, was clearly manipulated, clearly edited and so forth. So that's a controversy that's going to have to work itself out too. But anyways, so that's what those guys will point to. So under this category, is there a conspiracy ongoing? There's two more possibilities underneath that possibility, right? Either one of two things. The deep state, as Trump talks about, is still in control, and the president and his attorney general and all these folks, they just still don't have the goods. They don't have the information. The files have been purged, whatever. I don't know. But, Biden was in for 4 years, and who knows what his team did with all that information. Because we all know it was liberal Democrats who run this pedophile ring and all of that. And so they probably whitewashed the file, right? And that's kind of what Trump is beginning to intimate at. He says all these people, the Clintons and the Obamas and the Bidens and all these people, they're the ones who wrote the file, and it's garbage. There's nothing in there worthwhile, and implying that they whitewashed it all. That's one possibility. The deep state still is getting in the way of getting to the truth on this. The other possibility, if that's not the case, if there is an ongoing conspiracy, and if it's not the case that the deep state has whitewashed all the evidence, then that means Trump is in on it and his team, right? Those are the only two possibilities. And so now it gets really, really interesting, because I'm not pointing to any of those things. Again, I'm going to come to a common denominator at the end. That has to be true, right? But keep this in mind, by the way. Jeffrey Epstein was arrested, and the prosecution was beginning, and he ultimately died in prison in 2019, about a year and a half before Trump left office in his first term. In other words, it was Trump's Department of Justice, Trump's FBI, that arrested Epstein, that put him in jail, that did the investigation, that collected all the evidence, that wrote the reports initially. And again, if anybody were to know if this stuff existed, the client list and everything else, and if anybody were to know what really happened in that jail cell, it would be Trump's Justice Department from 2019, right? And yet, interestingly, all of these people, Bonnie, Patel, Bongino, Bannon, Carlson, Kelly, Flynn, and 100 others, Trump himself, for the last 4 years, they've been screaming at the Biden administration to release the files. Files that they began, files that now Trump is saying were written by Obama, somehow before this all happened, by Biden, after him, after Trump, and by Clinton or whoever else. The files were originated by Trump's team. They know what's there. They know what's there, but Trump is trying to deflect. He's trying to change the subject. He's trying to point the finger in a different direction to distract you and to confuse the whole situation and muddy the waters, all that. If anybody knows what's in those files, it's Donald Trump and his team, right? And they said back in 2019, there was nothing to the whole murder theory. There was nothing to the whole client list. They haven't got it, but yet they beat the drum against Biden for 4 years as part of their campaign strategy to win back the White House. And it worked. It worked, right? So again, there is an ongoing conspiracy, and you have one of two possibilities: that the deep state is still in control and Trump doesn't have access to all the facts, all the evidence, all the details. Hard to believe that's, again, since this started under his first administration. Or he's in on it. So if you believe that there is an ongoing conspiracy, you have to pick one of those two things. And there's no other options. There's no other choices, right? And again, it gets interesting because I don't put a lot of credence in the idea that the deep state has whitewashed the evidence of the files of this. That kind of thing is, whatever you see in the movies, that is not nearly as easy to do as it's made out to be. And again, remember, this file was originated in the first Trump administration. Whatever the facts are, whatever those pieces of evidence, they had it. That Trump Justice Department, they accumulated truckloads full of documents, photographs, videos, security videos from every one of Epstein's properties, all of it. And they had him in jail in New York, and they were the ones responsible for all of that. By the way, side note on that, I'm sure this was no great prediction on my part, but when Epstein went to jail, I was on the record publicly as saying they better be watching that guy 24/7 because he's going to die. And I don't mean to joke about somebody's death, but it was so obvious that either he did it on his own and was a suicide risk, or if he was a patsy for other people, they were going to get rid of him. I don't know how you let that guy sit in the cell without cameras for the one day that there's no cameras, he decides that's when he's going to take his life. So it's all very peculiar. A side note. Anyhow, is it an ongoing conspiracy? Is Trump in on it? So let's focus on that aspect because it's juicy, right? And it's interesting, and it's tantalizing to think about if you're interested in conspiracy theories, right? Trump promised for the last 4 years that he was going to release all these files in light of day and truth and all that sort of thing. And Bonnie promised even just a couple of weeks ago. The file was on her desk. The list was on her desk. She was going to release it all. And then a week later, it's like, oh, never mind. So let's just, again, let's think about that for a second. If there's an ongoing conspiracy, one of those two possibilities, there is or there isn't. There's an ongoing conspiracy. That means Trump and Bonnie and the others are in on it. Now, they're in on it, right? And now you got to ask yourself, why? Why? And go back a half a step from there. If there is something in those files, a high-level client list of evidence of murder, not suicide, why did the Biden administration not release it over the last 4 years? I mean, a lot of the conspiracy theorists on the right want to point to the last 4 years and say that Biden was protecting somebody important to him, somebody in his family. There's not been any indication whatsoever that Biden had any relationship with Epstein, but who knows, right? Hunter, maybe, right? We know he's had his issues with drugs and other things in the past. Maybe he got caught up in that and was, back and forth on the Lolita Express down to Little St. James. Who knows? But we do know that Bill Clinton had an extensive relationship with Epstein. Flew on his jet like 20 times, even after even after Acosta gave Epstein the sweetheart deal that kept him out of prison, uh, Clinton still associated with him, which is an interesting thing, by the way. So maybe he was on a list. Who knows who's on a list? But the assertion from the right is that the Biden administration has been protecting somebody on that list and does not let it out. You could surmise, right, that if it's somebody high level like Bill Clinton being protected, it's not so much for Clinton as it is to protect the Democrat Party, right? Because you might look at a list like that with top level Democrat leaders and say, this will destroy our party. Kind of the way Nixon destroyed the Republican Party for a few years after Watergate, right? So maybe that's what Biden was doing, was protecting his party. But now we've got Trump back in office. Now, remember, he was in when this whole thing started, didn't release any smoking guns. Now he's in again after having promised for 4 years to release everything, saying there's nothing to release. If you believe it's an ongoing conspiracy and that there is evidence that's in that file someplace, and now you have to believe that Trump is in on it, who's he protecting? Who's he protecting? What high-level Republicans are on that list that he's protecting? The only name that's ever come out of a really high-level Republican on that list is Trump. Now, there's been no allegations that Trump did anything specifically, but there is clearly a known relationship in the past between him and Epstein. But again, if you're going down this logical line of reasoning, there is an ongoing conspiracy. It's not that the deep state has hidden the evidence from Trump. It's not that. It must mean that Trump is in on it. The question becomes, who is he? I would argue, if you go down that line of reasoning, or logic rather, that there's only one person in the whole world, in the whole universe, that Donald Trump has ever cared about and is ever loyal to. That's himself. Some of you supporters may not agree with that, but that's just my view. There's nobody else that he would stand up for. Elon Musk said the other day that Steve Bannon was on the list. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. First and foremost, because Bannon's one of the ones pushing to have the list released. But also, Trump wouldn't be protecting Bannon. I mean, Trump fired Bannon before. He'll fire anybody. You can be his best friend one day. He'll fire you the next day. I don't even know if he'd protect Don Jr. if Don Jr. was on the list. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But the only insinuation of anybody powerful on the list is Trump from the Republican side. So now you got to ask yourself, is he concerned that something may come out about his relationship that we don't know yet? His relationship to Epstein? Maybe. But those are the two overarching possibilities and the two other possibilities below each of those, right? And where do you end up with all of it? You end up with a bunch of people you don't know who to believe and who to trust. You think there's an ongoing conspiracy, but Trump is putting the kibosh on it, so you can't trust him anymore. You think there never was a conspiracy, but Trump and Bondi and the rest had been telling us loudly over and over again for years that there was. So can you trust him again there? That's the common denominator. At the end of each one of these possibilities, and again, I don't take any sides. I don't know that I even believe there's a conspiracy. I think it's interesting. I think there's a lot of mystery, a lot of unanswered questions. But at the end of it all, two overarching possibilities, two possibilities below each of those possibilities, right? And they all end up in the same place. You can't trust any of them. And this is what I've said all along. And by the way, I'm not just talking about Trump. I'm talking about Biden too, right? These people have run our government in such a way, going way back, way before Trump, in such a way that we don't know who to believe anymore. We desperately want to believe somebody. And that's a big part of Trump's appeal to his folks. For whatever reason, his core supporters, they feel strongly that they can trust and believe in him. And that's a great thing. That's a credit to him. A lot of us don't share that. But the point is, in general, in government, we don't trust any of them. And that's a problem for us. You look at it and you think, screw those guys, right? But they're not the ones getting screwed. We are. Because when we don't have leaders that we can trust in government, where does that leave us? It leaves us apathetic. It leaves us accepting that things just suck, right? It goes back to the whole radical realist thing, where we have to accept that it's just going to be bad. And that for all the talk about people promising us that they're going to release the truth about whatever, in this case, this silly conspiracy. We don't know what to believe. We even have their own people arguing with each other now about whether it is or it isn't, right? Who do you believe? But the point is, no matter which one of those possible options, I'm not talking about, again, what I think it was, there are only so many possibilities, and all of them end up bad. You can't trust any of them. And one of the sort of common themes of Pep Talks is that we need to get back to being able to trust our leaders. We can have things the way they should be. We have the power to return it to the way it should be, but we have to recognize it in the first place. We can't just look at it and say, you know, we're out. We're out. Wash our hands of it. We don't want anything to do with it. That's what we, common sense, regular folks have been doing for a long time. It's just not wanting anything to do with it because of stuff like this. But I just find the Epstein conspiracy really interesting in that account, because apart from the media sensationalized bits of this, right? Did he kill himself or was he murdered? Did he have this dramatic list of rich and famous people who are getting away with it? Or doesn't he? That's the sensational media power establishment manipulation aspect of this. And we allow it to happen. But the point is, and I hope you can see it methodically, you go down that tree of the possibility, starting with 2, then 2 more underneath that, and they all end in the same place. Can't trust any of them. And we deserve to be able to trust our leaders. We need to be able to trust our leaders. That's what it's about. That's what Pep Talks is about. So listen, I'm going to stop it right there because that could go on and on. I've got all these, a book full of quotes from all these people over the last few years, all the things they said about that list and about the suicide and this and that and the other thing, the conspiracy. And now these very same people are saying just the opposite. And I haven't heard of one of them say, I'm sorry, I was just wrong. Right. And that would be a start. That'd be a start to just say you were wrong, but I'm not sure that would be enough. But anyways, I really want to know what you think. These kinds of conspiracies tend to drive sort of everybody in one direction or another. And I'm curious about it. I'm genuinely intellectually curious about the way people think about this kind of stuff. But in addition to just letting me know what you think about it in general, which of these sides do you take? Never a conspiracy is a conspiracy. Do you accept when they say, well, maybe we were wrong? Or do you think you've been manipulated? Do you think Trump's in on it now? It's part of the conspiracy. It's part of the cover up. I want to hear what you have to say about that, what you think. So leave some comments for me. That's it. That's it for today's Pep Talk. As always, be sure to like, follow, share, and comment. You can join the Pep Club by subscribing to our weekly Pepcast on our YouTube channel and our homepage at the links below. Until next time, remember, together, we have the power to reunite America and make things the way they should be. Thanks, everyone.